Hello and welcome to All the Things. This is the show where we discuss all the things related to God, the Bible, and real life. I'm Krista Bontrager, also known as Theology Mom. And once again, I am joined by our friend Kevin Briggins because Monique is still out of town. Welcome, Kevin.
Thank you. Thank you. It's good to be back. I always enjoy coming on All the Things.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. And I put a little post on Facebook last week saying, hey, everyone, what would you think if Kevin and I had a conversation about isolationism and armed conflict and global security? And people are like, you had me at, what would you think if we have Kevin on? You're starting to have your own little following there.
Nice. I didn't see that post.
Yeah, people were pretty excited. They love having you on. And I do want to let everyone know that Monique will be back with me live in studio, God willing, next Saturday. You are not going to want to miss out on that because she will be giving us an update about where she's been the last month and the good, the bad, and the ugly of short-term mission trips and all of that. I thought it might be interesting to get her perspective because she's gone on multiple short-term mission trips, but she's also hosted, when she lived in Africa, many short-term mission teams. Maybe we can get some of her insight on when short-term missions are a good thing, when they're a helpful thing and an unhelpful thing, because sometimes people are asking us for money to support them. Maybe it'll give us some wisdom into some better questions to ask. So I do want to let everyone know that Monique will be back with us live next week. So you won't want to miss that. Make sure that you are subscribed because YouTube likes to help you unsubscribe sometimes. And also make sure that you are signed up for our weekly updates so you always know when we're going live and what shows are coming up. We send out those announcements every Friday. Now, Kevin, I know that we had you on just a couple of weeks ago. We talked about how to read a political platform, kind of in a way continuing that conversation tonight because the election is coming up, and one of the big themes in the election is on global security. Maybe tell us a little bit about your background and, your kind of a little bit of your experience in why you're qualified for us to be as a conversation partner today on this topic.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've had a 22-year career as an intelligence analyst within the intelligence community. And I have a background in Middle Eastern studies. So that's kind of basis of international relations, political science degree, but just focused on the Middle East. And so my career has mostly expanded dealing with issues regarding to the Middle East, the war on terror, political Islam, and those types of things. So, and not just limited to that in terms of understanding the global landscape of what we call Indo-PACOM, which is the South Asia and all of those types of things. So,
well, we're really glad to have you as a resource. You are on the board for the Center for Biblical Unity, but we do want to make clear that any statements you make tonight are they're purely your opinion. They're not necessarily a reflection of the U.S. military as a whole or any of your commanding officers. You are only speaking for yourself.
Absolutely.
Okay. We don't want to get anybody in trouble.
Nope.
Now, your time in the military is quickly coming to an end, Lord willing, but we're really glad for your help with these tricky topics because the world does feel like such an unstable place. We have the whole ongoing conflict with Russia and Ukraine. Venezuela's in chaos. The Israel war is almost a year old. there's naval maneuvers in the Red Sea. It's just a lot, like all the
Yes.
time, never ending, very complicated. There's China, there's Iran, and nuclear things, and it feels like we're constantly on the edge of World War III. It's troubling. I try not to think about it because it's a little anxiety inducing. It just feels like a lot.
It is, and it feels like a lot because we have this thing called social media, and we have 24-hour cable news. So we are inundated with information and what's going on all throughout the world 24/7. So is one thing we have to remember is that this is normal. Peace is what's rare, right? And so we've kind of gotten used to this kind of post-World War II type world where the world is kind of at peace through U.S. power, right? But even with that being in place, we've still had conflicts throughout the world. But as Americans, we're so used to peace that it's hard for us to understand how the rest of the world lives in this kind of chaos or this threat or lack of security because we've always had it in our lifetime.
In preparation for this show, I actually went back and watched Eisenhower's final speech when he was leaving office, and it was in the late 50s, I believe. And he was talking about, it's a famous one on YouTube. People can go look it up. If you just type in Eisenhower and military industrial complex, you'll see it come up. It's about 20 minutes. And one of the things he talks about in that speech is how the military changed after World War II. And it does seem like it's changed. Earlier this season, we did a show on just war theory. And we talked to a political science professor from Regent University. His name escapes me right now. But one of the things that he said is one of the thoughts about just war theory is that wars come to an end.
Yes.
But it does seem like, and one of the things I was picking up on in the Eisenhower speech is the growth of the military since World War II, and that there is kind of this more global concept of our engagement around the world. Now, after Eisenhower, eventually we moved into the Vietnam era, and then we had the very short war in the early 90s in the Middle East. But then after 9/11, we were engaged in a very long, ongoing conflict in the Middle East. And now it just feels like, and maybe this is just my perception, but these conflicts and our involvement with them keep multiplying since the 1950s and the post-World War II era. I'm just wondering what thoughts you have about that and setting kind of the big picture for this conversation.
Yeah. So in the past, war was local, right? You fought with your neighbors. That changed after World War II, right? Because now we can reach across oceans. So I know we're going to talk about isolationism, but the attack on Pearl Harbor ended the idea of isolationism. That the fact that you can have this war going on in Europe, that we could just say, you know what, we're not getting involved with that. That has nothing to do with that. And then before you know it, you're impacted by it. And so the mindset changed because we also used to feel like our oceans could keep us safe. We were so far away from everybody. So if there was conflict in Asia, you had the Pacific Ocean. Conflict in Europe, you had the Atlantic Ocean. And so America used to feel like that has nothing to do with us. That's across the ocean. But the attack on Pearl Harbor, the entire World War II, it changed that mindset. And so we became this global military, this global force. You know, we had bases in Germany that we never left out the World War II. Same thing in Japan. You know, then the Korean War, we left and we kept troops in Korea. And so we started expanding this kind of international global military power that could respond and react to anything happening in the world because we understood that what happens in the rest of the world does affect us. And it also ties to global economics, right? And so we're going to get into that when we talk about, okay, what's going on in the Red Sea, and it's economics.
Okay. So big picture wise, draw that out for me a little bit more. Like what is the goal now? Because the goal in World War II for me just felt very clear. Like,
Yes.
I know what we're up to. We're crushing Nazis. We're killing fascists. Like, we're trying to ensure that rescuing the Jews from the Holocaust. Like, the objectives seem very clear. I don't feel as clear anymore on these global conflicts. What is our general kind of give me the high level strategy when it comes to military engagement? What are we trying to accomplish?
Yeah, so I encourage everybody to read the National Defense Strategy. It comes out every 4 years. The last time it came out was 2022. And what it does is it lays out the objectives of the United States military and foreign policy for the next 4 years. And it just, in general, the military's purpose is to ensure the national security of the United States. And that's not just military security, but economic security. So economic security is a part of national security. And that's what a lot of people don't understand. Also, being an ally or partner to our allies. So sometimes it can be something that doesn't directly involve us, but it involves one of our allies. And so we will come to their aid or in various ways in those types of conflicts. So that's why it seems like, why are we involved in Ukraine? Why do we care about that, right? The one thing that a lot of Americans don't understand or realize that our military power and our economic power gains us favor and influence throughout the world. Other nations want to be friends with us because whether we give them money and aid or whether we provide them with military support and defense. So basically we have this worldwide coalition, or some people would call it kind of like the United States hegemonic or world order that is led by the Western powers. So the world is kind of guided by and led by the will and power of the Western nations. And so a lot of things we do is to ensure that continues. And other nations and other alliances are trying to change that because they want to be the world power. They want to be the ones who determine things. So we're going to get into that and some other questions. Yeah.
Well, since you already brought it up, let's talk a little bit more about isolationism, because you're making the claim that things that happen in other countries have some connection to us, our well-being, our economic well-being, and that we ought to be involved in certain things. That's kind of what I hear is the claim that you're making. And I think that what I'm hearing is a growing number of voices on social media, particularly on Twitter, that are asking the question, why is this our business? Why is it our business that Russia invades Ukraine? Why is it our business that Israel wants to go to war against Hamas? Why is it our business to think about what's happening in the Red Sea? Like, why don't we just say, look, these people have to sort out their own problems. We have enough problems in our own country. We shouldn't involve ourselves with these other countries. I think people are kind of burned out on feeling like we're constantly at war.
Yeah.
Try to change my mind about this and think about that.
I would say just because there's war going on doesn't mean we're at war. We are not at war right now. There are conflicts that we are aiding and supporting in some type of way, but the United States is not at war. Ukraine and Russia are at war. Israel and Hamas are at war. We are not at war. No matter how much we, fund Israel with rockets or fund the Ukrainians with weapons, we are not at war. And I think that's important. The reason we get involved with these things, because it serves some type of national interest to us. Other nations do the same thing. I'll go back to the Russian war in Afghanistan. How did we bring down the Soviets? We funded the Afghan resistance against the Soviets, and they got bogged down for 10 years. It basically bankrupted their nation, and the Soviet Union eventually ended up collapsing because of economic reasons.
You're talking about the 1980s conflict.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. And so it's kind of the same thing now. We are aiding the Ukrainians. Number one, we have a common interest, but number two, it's hurting Russia. People think about the money that we're spending in Ukraine. Like, oh my goodness, how can we spend this much money? Think how much money Russia's spending. Look at the number of troops they're losing. Look at they're depleting their military. That's good for us because Russia's bogged down in a war. They're spending lots of resources. They're losing soldiers. They're losing equipment. They're spending tons of money. They're having to be propped up by countries like China and Iran and just all those different things. It's like this, the longer they're bogged down in this, the better it is for us because it's hurting them. And the money we're spending is a drop in the bucket. And other nations did the same thing. When we were in Afghanistan and Iraq, how do you think those opposition groups got funded? I mean, they weren't just surviving on their own. Other nations were funding and training those fighters and arming them against us, which is it's proxy wars, as people call it.
So I think what I hear you saying in that is if we weren't funding some of these conflicts, other countries who are our enemies and do not want good toward us would step in and fund things and try to win the loyalty of these groups.
Yeah, it's one of those things. What I would say is capitalize on Russia's mistake. Nobody made Russia invade Ukraine. So it's like, okay, you got yourself into this. We're just going to aid the Ukrainians against you. And it's hurting Russia. And so that's good for us because if you go back and look at our national defense strategy, the two key things are that our mind is focused on is Russia and China, right? And so as long as Russia is occupied with that, as long as they're spending their resources and getting bogged down in that war, it's good for us because they can't exert power and influence somewhere else.
Well, what about, how would you answer the concern? I mean, because you made a statement a minute ago that the expenses are just drop in the bucket. Well, I look at our country and how much we're confused, we're struggling, and so why are we sending all our money to Ukraine, which I think there's a lot of questions about whether or not that money is even being used for the purposes that we're sending in and whether it's being laundered. I mean, there's just a lot of possibility of corruption there. Why are we doing that when in our country we are struggling? Shouldn't we be resourcing our own house before we're resourcing another house?
You can think of it that way, but the question I would respond with is, what issue in our country aren't we solving because we don't have enough money? I don't think there's any issue within our own country that can't be solved because we don't have enough money. Like, oh, if we just had more money, we would solve this problem. I don't think that's the case.
So like, let's say border security, for example. You don't think our border security problem could be solved with?
Absolutely. I just don't believe that it has anything to do with a lack of money. It's a politics. It's a lack of will to fix that problem. We don't have a lack of funding. Like Trump's border wall is really a drop in the bucket to where we just sent to Ukraine. Like we can do a bunch of border walls for the money we've sent to Ukraine. It is not an issue of money. It is an issue of willpower. It's a political issue.
It's a political issue. That's interesting. So if we were to go down, this road just a little bit more, like related to the questions of isolationism, isn't being at war all the time sort of a scheme? That it's some people are making money off of
Tons of
us
money.
being at war, and that this is the military industrial complex is really just big business. And so maybe there are people who want us to be at war all the time. And I'm going to play a quick clip by RFKJ, Robert Kennedy Jr., and he makes some comments along these lines as well, that I see this kind of sentiment on the internet, and then we'll have you comment on all of that.
This is a war that should have never happened. It's a war the Russians tried repeatedly to settle on terms that were very, very beneficial to Ukraine and us. The major thing they wanted was for us to keep NATO out of the Ukraine. The big military contractors want to add new countries to NATO all the time. Why? Because then that country has to conform its military purchases to NATO weapon specifications, which means certain companies, Northrop Grumman, Raytheon, General Dynamics, Boeing, and Lockheed, get a trapped market. March of 2022, we committed $113 billion. Just to give you an example, we could have built a home for almost every homeless person in this country. We then committed another $24 billion since then, 2 months ago, and now President Biden is asking for another $60 billion. But the big, big expenses are going to come after the war, when we have to rebuild all the things that we destroy. Mitch McConnell was asked, can we really afford to spend $113 billion in Ukraine? He said, don't worry. It's not really going to Ukraine.
It's going to American defense manufacturers.
So he just admitted it's a money laundering scheme. And who do you think owns every one of those companies? Yeah, BlackRock. So Tim Scott, during the Republican debate, said, don't worry, it's not a gift to Ukraine, it's a loan. So raise your hand if you think that that loan's ever getting paid back. Yeah, of course it's not. So why do they call it a loan? Because if they call it a loan, they can impose loan conditions. And what are the loan conditions that we impose on? Number one, an extreme austerity program, so that if you're poor in Ukraine, you're going to be poor forever. Number two, most important, Ukraine has to put all of its government-owned assets up for sale to multinational corporations, including all of its agricultural land, the biggest single asset in Europe. In Ukraine, there's been 1,000 years of war fought over that land. It's the richest farmland in the world. It's the breadbasket of Europe. 500,000 kids almost, Ukrainians, have died to keep that land as part of Ukraine. They almost certainly didn't know about this loan condition. They've already sold 30% of it. The buyers were DuPont, Cargill, and Monsanto. Who do you think owns all of those companies? Yeah, BlackRock. And then in December, President Biden gave out the contract to rebuild Ukraine. And who do you think got that contract? BlackRock. So they're doing this right in front of us. They don't even care that we know anymore, because they know that they can get away with it. And how do they know that? Because they have a strategy. And that strategy is an old strategy, which is they keep us at war with each other. They keep us hating on each other. They keep the Republicans and Democrats fighting each other, and black against white, and all these divisions that they sow.
So in there, he's making a lot of claims. We can't unpack all of that. But the big picture is that this military industrial complex, it's really just enriching certain corporations. Certain people are getting very, very rich off us being constantly at war. I don't know if I'm persuaded with you that like $113 billion in one of the packages we sent to Ukraine, that sounds like a lot of money to me. And I don't know if I buy your argument that, it's a drop in the bucket, but, I'm not good with numbers. Maybe that's the case. But I guess when I think about RFKJ's argument here, this sounds compelling. What do you hear with your knowledge in what he's saying? Is there any validity to that, or do you see it kind of differently?
I was to start off by saying that I agree that BlackRock and other corporations like it are a major problem because they are using their resources and their money to buy up resources like farmland. They can control the food supply. It is scary to a degree what they're trying to do. And if they're in cahoots with, say, like the World Economic Forum, right, where they want us to eat bugs, they could literally force us to do that if they own the agricultural land and all that type of stuff. So BlackRock and their endeavors and their worldview and ideology is a problem. But this is what I would say to his entire argument of a scheme. Just because I benefit from something doesn't mean I caused it, right? That's like saying funeral homes benefit from people dying, so therefore funeral homes are responsible for guns being on the streets. Because who benefits at the end of the day? It's the funeral home. They get all the money. Like, it's one of those things of just because I take advantage of a situation or I step into a situation, I benefit from it, it doesn't mean that I caused it, right? And his framing that, oh, Putin was just this reasonable guy and it was just the military industrial complex forced this, that's where he goes wrong. Because did he ever stop to think, what does Ukraine want? It's not the military industrial complex forcing NATO on these countries. Do you ever think that Russia's invasion of Ukraine is proof of why Ukraine wants to be in NATO? When was it NATO's fault when in 2014 when Russia invaded Ukraine the first time and took Crimea as their own? Is there any wonder why now they were like, you know what, we would really like to be in NATO and have that protection? No. Stop blaming some military industrial complex system for Russia's own actions, right? Because NATO exists to protect nations from Russia. And Russia's invasion of Ukraine is just proof of why nations want to be in NATO. And so this idea that this is only some money scheme and Russia's the victim in this situation, that's where he goes wrong. But is BlackRock a problem? Yes. Is the military industrial complex a real thing that benefits and makes billions of dollars off of conflict? Absolutely. But that's my take on that would be completely different, because I think the military industrial complex benefits off of what sounds like something really good. And it's the way we've civilized war, right? We've made war nice and easy, and it's easy to get into because you don't have a lot of loss of life. This isn't like World War II anymore or Vietnam when the bodies are just coming back stacked up. And we can have these long, drawn out, continuous, never ending wars because of the way we approach them. If we approach war the way war used to be approached, we would have less of it. Because back in the day, when you went to war with someone, the goal was to annihilate them. It wasn't this, we're going to go in here, we're going to really try not to hurt the civilians. And we're going to kind of go tit for tat, and we just kind of work around. No, it was like wipe out everybody, take the women and children if you want, kill all the men, conquer them, wipe them out, right? And so it's one of those things of, if we view war that way today, number one, you would be less likely to get into it, and you'd be less likely to start a war with someone, right? But the way we do it today, we make it so casual. It is so tit for tat. All of these countries and these nations know that they're not going to lose power. So Iran can fire a bunch of rockets at Israel and know that it's not going to be any real repercussions. There's going to be some type of return strike, but it's not going to be anything. So this whole thing just keeps going. That's like they're calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. Why? So 6 months from now we can be in another war. If the enemy never surrenders, you're just going to be in constant state of war. And to me, that's what the military industrial complex benefits from. It benefits from this thing of this nice war thing we do, and it never ends. and it's just continuous. It's a continuous line of money because the war never ends. And so, but we make it sound nice. We make it sound this is some really good thing, and we're so, civilized now, and we don't harm the women and the children. I know those things are good, but those are also the things that make war easy to get into and makes it to where it's continuous and just never ending.
That's interesting. So then it kind of makes me think that the nature of war has changed since World War II. And
Absolutely.
So we might not ever be in a situation again where there's a definite end to the fighting. That might be a pillar of just war theory that has to be rethought or reconsidered.
Well, I will say this too. We also, since World War II, we haven't been in a war of powers. There has never been since World War II, it hasn't been a direct conflict between two major powers. And so it's all of these proxy wars and all of these kind of, tit for tats. And so we really don't know what that would look like if the United States and China went to war. Would it go back to that old way? I don't think it would, but the reason it looks so different is because the world powers have not gone into conflict with one another since World War II. And that's a good thing. World War II was horrible, and the world realized that, and so it is avoided at all costs. But that's one of the reasons we've seen a shift in it since then. It just looks different.
All right, with that, we're going to take a quick time out here and hear from our friends at Birmingham Theological Seminary. We'll see you in 1 minute.
My time with BTS has been a time of theological excellence, but it's also been a time of learning practical personal ministry.
The things that I learned here at BTS, I have implemented them into my ministry.
I was not necessarily planning on getting a seminary degree. I just would choose Birmingham Theological Seminary classes that I was the most interested in, that I thought could help me develop the most. But I ended up getting my MDiv from BTS, and there's so much that I've learned.
I'm really, really indebted to BTS because without it, I don't think I could have gotten this far. I initially started it because I had been called to a church, had no theological education, but knew I needed it. So between having my first child, doing my first job, and having my first church, BTS came in and just sort of helped me to understand what it meant to be a qualified minister and to be a studied minister that could rightfully divide the word of truth.
And once again, I want to commend to you our friends at Birmingham Theological Seminary. It's the seminary where I am working on a doctor of ministry. Kevin was actually the one who first told Monique and I about BTS. It's been a wonderful partnership with them down there in Birmingham. And just go check them out. See if they might be right for you. Well, this is interesting, Kevin. You're giving me a lot of things to think about here. Since you just brought up the war in Israel, let's talk about that. It's still happening. We're coming up already on the 1-year anniversary since Israel was invaded by Hamas. What has the U.S.'s involvement in that war been? And do you think that it was the right move for us to be involved in that?
Yeah, so we've kind of played two different roles. We we funded Israel and given them certain types of weapons and bombs and stuff that they needed. And we've also, typically in these situations, with all of our allies, we provide them with some level of intelligence. And we've also we've tried to do our best to keep it from escalating. So in other words, we want to do our best to keep Iran and other nations from getting involved. So that's why as soon as it happens, we put an aircraft carrier in the Red Sea. It's kind of a show of force to say, okay, everybody stay out of it. Don't do anything crazy. One thing about that people tend to forget is that Hamas killed and kidnapped American citizens. And so absolutely it's right for us to be involved. Because there are Americans involved. And so that's kind of where I stand on it. And that's kind of the position that the United States has taken in terms of in ways we support Israel. and in ways we kind of trying to prevent the conflict from expanding into something bigger. If you remember when Iran shot I think it was over 300 missiles and drones and stuff at Israel, the Iron Dome did a great job protecting Israel, but so did we. We shot down a lot of those things before they even got to Israel. And so we that's kind of the role we played in this conflict.
Do you think that was the right decision on our part? Do you feel like that there's strong enough interest in Israel? Because, there's this thing lurking in the background that America is now an occupied nation. We're just a puppet of Israel, and, we really have no business being involved in that conflict. So I guess, what do you see as being the national interest in us helping Israel in this war and, in that sort of a thing? And are we just an Israel puppet?
No, we're not an Israel puppet. Israel, like other nations, is one of our allies. It's not our closest ally. We like to say it's our closest ally in the region in terms of the Middle East, but in terms of our closest allies and people that would have influence on us, we get involved with, Israel isn't even in the top 5. But yes, I believe it was the right decision. Like I said, American citizens were killed by Hamas, and American citizens were kidnapped and taken hostage. So we have American lives lost and American lives that have been taken. Yes, we did the right thing to get involved, because that's what we do when American lives are involved. So I get the sentiment of, and the whole, we're just Israel puppets and stuff. There's a lot of stuff being said from the isolationist crowd, and it's the new isolationist crowd. These people just became isolationists in the last year or so, and so they're making these claims that Israel controls U.S. foreign policy, and that's just not true. Does Israel have influence? Does we talk about Jewish lobbyist groups and all that type of stuff? Absolutely, but so do other nations, right? This isn't just something that is about Israel. It comes down to, is Israel's security in the interest of our security? So when we talk about the stability of the Middle East or that part of the world, in our minds, Israel's stability and safety and security is key to that region. Number one, it's the only democracy in the region. And so therefore, it's important to us that it survives. And we've been the mediators of this conflict since the beginning, right, between Israel and the Palestinians. And so it's just natural for us to be involved, especially when American lives are at stake.
Okay, well, since we're on the topic of the Middle East, let's talk a little bit about Iran, because Iran seems to be lurking behind some of the events that happened in Israel, that they were facilitating, funding Hamas and that invasion. Should we be concerned about Iran? Do they really have nuclear capabilities? Is that just a rumor? Are they working toward that? What is the concern that we should have about Iran? Because it's really hard to know based on the news what to believe and what's not real.
Yeah, I mean, Iran is anti-West. Ever since the Islamic Revolution of 1979, Iran has been an enemy to the West. And so, they have their very extremist views. And I want to be clear, too, when we talk about Iran, we're talking about the Iranian regime. We're talking about the leadership, the government, not necessarily their people, right? The government and the regime, they have their own plans, their own ambitions. They hate the Jews, they hate the West, and they fund groups to carry out attacks against Israel. When we talk about Iran being a threat, militarily, they are no threat to us. However, they are a threat to stability in the region, which is what they try to do. They want to undermine the region. And that is also why if they don't have nuclear capabilities, but if they ever achieved them, that would be bad. It would be really bad because
So they don't actually have nuclear capabilities, because
no,
I keep hearing that they do, but I don't know what that means.
If they ever gained it, if they were ever on like the verge of getting nuclear weapons, Israel would go to war with them directly to prevent that from happening.
So you see kind of what their strategy is just constant disruption, agitation, but you don't feel like their military is going to take over our military, or they're going to be bombing us or anything like that.
No.
Okay.
Iran, I mean, you saw how the Gulf War went with Iraq. Iran would be a similar type of thing. Military, they couldn't compete. You saw they fired all their stuff at Israel, and like one thing got to Israel, kind of deal. They use that's why they use those proxy groups. They use terrorist groups. They use Hamas. They use Hezbollah. They use the Houthis in Yemen, which I know we're going to get to. But that's kind of their strength. And this is what people need to realize too about Iran and nuclear weapons. Iran is Islam is two major sects, Shia and Sunni. Iran is the bedrock of Shia Islam. And all the other nations primarily are Sunni. The vast majority of Muslims throughout the world are Sunnis, and a very small percentage of Shia, but that's mainly Iran and Iraq. If Iran was to get nuclear weapons, you're basically starting a nuclear arms race within the Middle East. Saudi Arabia is not going to sit by and let Iran have nukes, and they don't. Same with these other nations. And so the last thing the world needs is a nuclear armed Middle East. And so that is why it is really important that Iran does not get nuclear weapons. Because can you imagine Middle Eastern nations with what we know, the threat of terrorism and radical Islam and all of these types of things? Can you imagine how much they dislike each other? Can you imagine if they had nuclear weapons at hand? And so that just wouldn't be a good for survival of the world. We're going to be environmentalists and talk about Greenpeace and all. The last thing you would want is Iran with nuclear weapons.
Well, that's what I'm thinking too, but I thought they already had them. So I'm going to sleep a little better tonight knowing that they don't actually have them. So that's good to know. But the Middle East is just a very confusing kind of situation for me.
Complicated.
It does seem a little complicated. And, Israel is trying to fight, in a sense, a multi-front war, because they're surrounded on three sides by countries that don't like them and don't want them to exist as a country. So, yeah.
And I'll say this too. And I'll say this: the Sunni nations have mostly become at peace with Israel.
Okay.
Saudi Arabia.
Tell me more about that. That's new information for me. So tell me more about that.
So we talk about the Abraham Accords that Trump signed had Israel and some of the Arab nations sign. Those were all Sunni nations. Right before this October 7th attack happened, Israel and Saudi Arabia were on the verge of signing some type of long-term peace agreement. We know Egypt signed peace with Israel years ago, and their president got assassinated because he made peace with Israel. And so,
that was when I was a kid. That was like in the 70s, I think.
Yep, it was.
I was in the 6th grade. I remember when that happened. Yeah.
Yep. They placed a bomb under his chair.
Yeah.
And so the Sunni nations have made peace with Israel, Jordan. It's the Shia nations. It is mainly Iran and their proxy groups that continue to fight this war of from the river to the sea.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
And it's kind of complicated too, because Hamas is Sunni. Like the Palestinians and Hamas are Sunni, but yet they get a lot of funding from Iran, who is Shia, because it's like the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So because they're fighting Israel, Iran funds them a lot.
So that supposed $8 billion or whatever that our government gave Iran, do you feel like that was, I'm assuming that was kind of stupid, but not catastrophic in a sense of it's going to, annihilate the Middle East through nukes or something?
No, it just allowed them, it freed up more cash, more money, allowed them to carry out more attacks, fund more groups.
Okay.
It's one of those things of, it's a difference in how you view foreign policy. The Trump administration was peace through strength. We're going to be very strong and we're going to have peace because if you get out of line, you're going to pay for it, whether it's economically, whether it's sanctions, or whether it is actual, we drop, a nuke and kill your top general because you were launching attacks. That type of strength typically does lead to peace. Russia did not invade Ukraine while President Trump was in office. He did invade under President Obama, and he did invade under President Biden. There's this other side of not peace through strength, but peace through diplomacy. It's almost like peace through niceness.
Oh, okay. So different presidents, and you've been in the military under multiple presidents, so you've seen different strategies. So you would say I've never heard it this way, that peace through diplomacy is one strategy, peace through strength, which was more of the Reagan approach with the Soviet Union. You think that the peace through strength maybe is more effective?
I believe so. I want to put it in a way listeners can understand. It's like parenting. Okay. When there is something behind your threats as a parent, it hits home. Hey, if you don't clean your room, this is going to happen. Or if a kid, gets smart mouth, there are some consequences from the parents. The peace through just diplomacy with nothing behind it is more like gentle parenting. It is. It's like the "Don't Make Me Count to 3" books, right?
Okay.
It's like the kids is gonna push the limit to see how much they can get away with before you finally say something or do something, and then you never do. It's like, oh, you crossed this line, little Johnny. Johnny crossed the line, and now John, you crossed this line. It just doesn't work, right? Or you try to bribe them, and if you don't cross the line, I'll give you candy, right? That is how some administrations view foreign policy with these other nations, right? It's basically like parenting styles. And so
you said to me once that you thought one of the reasons Trump was so effective in the Middle East is because he was very unpredictable.
Absolutely.
And I thought it was such an interesting comment because sometimes we don't like Trump because he is unpredictable. We don't know what he's going to do next. And definitely been true in the last few weeks and some of his position shifts. But you think that that's actually effective in dealing with the Middle East. Why is that?
Because every nation takes into account what the U.S. reaction is going to be to their actions. And if they really don't have a strong sense of what that could be, and there could be heavy consequences for their action, they're less likely to do it. But if they have a good sense that the administration that's in power is going to react a certain way that they're okay with, then they're going to go ahead and do what they want to do because they know what the reaction is going to be, because it's going to be a typical reaction where they say, well, we know this administration isn't going to get into any kind of a conflict, or, especially if you run a campaign on not getting into a conflict, every country out there knows that you're not going to get into a conflict because you ran your campaign on it, right? And that's typically from the left, right? It's starting to happen with the right, the isolationists, and and the idea of the constant wars and things like that. But at the end of the day, there's still a idea of, if you don't want to go to war, then be strong. Strength prevents war. It doesn't lead to war.
So, well, I think strength prevents war when the person with the strength is clear that, why they're having the strength. Strength could lead to war if they're wicked, but yeah, I know what you're saying.
Yeah, I'll give an example because this story just recently came out, I'll say in the last 6 months. It was a story of President Trump meeting with the Taliban commanders. And he basically said, okay, this is the deal. We're going to do this. We're going to leave on this date. And he said, if y'all attack us, there will be consequences. And he slid the Taliban leader a picture of his house, a satellite photo of his own house. And the message was clear. If you mess with us, we will kill you and your family. And he walked out the room. That's strength, right?
Yeah.
That is the kind of person you need in charge. Because this is the thing that people don't realize. The rest of the world, from a cultural standpoint, they only respect strength. They don't respect niceness and kindness. They respect strength. That's why Putin is in power. Look throughout the world. Look at the world leaders. They are powerful. They show strength. And that is what people respect, because if you don't show strength, you know what happens? You get assassinated, you get taken out, you get replaced. And the next guy comes in and he's strong. And so it's one of those things that we have to realize, how does the rest of the world think and respond? And we have to make our actions according to that, not just in how we want to think and respond, or how would we, And so when you're thinking about how the rest of the world operates, it is through strength. And so that's why strength is effective.
Interesting. So one more issue while we're on the Middle East, and I want to talk about the Red Sea, because there is some kind of naval maneuvering happening in the Red Sea area, but I can't really understand why or what is happening. So maybe you can explain it to me like I'm 5, because I just don't understand what's going on there.
Yeah, like it's all economic. And so you got the Houthis, which is a Shia group in Yemen, funded by Iran.
Okay.
And what they are
one of those proxy groups.
One of those proxy groups.
All right.
And what they're doing is they are attacking like oil tankers. They're disrupting the oil industry and the flow of oil throughout the world. They're just causing chaos. They're just causing trouble. And that's why we have to go in, send our Navy in there. One of the main jobs of the U.S. Navy that people don't understand is their job is to keep the global trade waterways open. So the Red Sea, the Persian Gulf when it comes to oil, South China Sea when it comes to goods, and all these places around the world that are main economic lines of global trade. It is the United States military that keep those lanes open and free for travel, for trade. Otherwise, you wouldn't get your iPhone and all those types of things. And so,
that makes it clear. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, the Houthis are down there causing trouble, attacking oil tankers, attacking, other ships that are coming through there, because they're just trying to disrupt the flow of oil and trade out the region.
Okay. Now, you brought up Russia earlier and their conflict with Ukraine. Should we be concerned about Russia? Like, what is their strategy in the world? What is Putin really trying to accomplish in positioning himself in the global?
Yeah. So Russia's a threat because Russia has nukes. That's the only thing, right?
Okay.
I would say prior to the Ukraine war, there was this idea, hey, Russia is legit because we know they have legitimate military capabilities and technology and weapons and stuff like that. It has been a major kind of eye-opening experience to see how much they have struggled to actually carry out a war in Ukraine. And so it's more so Russia is almost like a paper tiger now, but very dangerous because they do still have nuclear weapons. But in terms of a conventional conflict right now, the last thing Russia would ever want is a war with NATO or war with the United States, because they couldn't win it. That's being proven by the fact they can't beat Ukraine in a war. And the Ukrainian war isn't like Afghanistan or Iraq, where you're fighting these terrorist groups, where it's urban warfare, you're dealing with insurgency fighting. This is simply force on force. This is tank on tank, man on man, conventional warfare. Here's the front lines, we're fighting. And Russia can't beat the Ukrainians. And that is an eye-opening thing. So in terms of big military capability, Russia is less of a threat today than this. Carrying out a war isn't easy. No matter if you got all the bullets and guns, the logistics and the operations it take to actually carry out a war plan isn't easy. And they're struggling to do that. But they have nuclear weapons. And so that's always a major concern.
So maybe their military isn't as strong as it once was, as we're seeing it's taken them so long to take out the Ukrainians, which is a much smaller country, but there is the threat of nukes for them. So, and I have to admit that I do not understand the whole conflict between Russia and Ukraine, other than what I keep hearing, tragically, I hope this isn't true, that on the Ukrainian side, it's really taken out like virtually a whole generation of Ukrainian men. I mean, it's been fairly devastating to them, but I don't completely understand why the U.S. is involved in that. Is it really just depletion of resources to deplete Russia? Is that really as simple as it is of what we're doing there? Is there anything else you can help me understand about that conflict?
Yeah, I mean, that's the depletion of Russia is one benefit of it, but we also believe in the Ukrainians' right to the sovereignty of their nation. And so the fact that Russia is literally trying to come in and annex their country and make it a part of their own, that is, so from the global order of things, from the U.S. perspective, that is a bad thing and a no-no. And so Russia should go back home, leave Ukraine alone. There are also some other things in terms of, like you heard in the RFK Jr. video, he talks about Ukraine being the breadbasket of Europe, right? Well, do you want that type of stuff in the control of Russia in terms of how much, food and stuff comes out of there that goes into Europe? That is very strategic from whether Russia controls it or the Ukrainians control it. You also have, they took Crimea because everybody said, well, Russia needed access to the Black Sea. And so the way they did that was to go through Ukraine, took part of Ukraine, and now they have a strategic port in the Black Sea. And so some of it is just strategic, it's military, it's economic. And then some of it is just principle of Russia did this thing, we're going to support. The Ukrainians are the victims. So it's one of those things of, we're going to support the Ukrainians because they're the victims of Russian aggression for no reason. Ukraine did nothing to Russia. They didn't invade Russia. They didn't put their military on the front. Ukraine did nothing to Russia except talk to the U.S. and the West about joining NATO. That's what they did wrong.
Yeah, and I mean, some people say Zelensky is, just a puppet. Other people say he's a pedophile. Other people say that he's just banking all the money for himself. I have no idea what to think of Zelensky or what he's up to, but just in principle, it sounds like your position is we're supporting the Ukrainians as a people to have a sovereign nation and not have their border overrun.
Yeah. And this I'll say too about Ukraine. Ukraine it's not like, oh, Ukraine is the good guys, Russia's the bad guys. That's not the line. Because I know Ukraine itself, like Russia, has a lot of corruption. It is very similar culturally in terms of how they operate, where corruption is just kind of expected and written into like the code. For example, in Russia, if you hold a certain position, people just assume that you take a portion of whatever comes in. It's just a thing, right? There's a guy wrote a book, Larry Taunton. He's an apologist, a Christian apologist, and he wrote a book called The Grace Effect. And in that book, he's detailing the level of corruption that they had to go through to adopt their daughter from Ukraine. And every step of the way, the only way they got it done was to hand somebody some money. Like they would go to a guy, there was a meeting set up, and then the person would refuse to see them. And then their translator would tell them, he'll see you, but he wants some money. And so they would have to pay hundreds of dollars or whatever it was. And then the guy said, oh yeah, come on in. And he wrote this book about just how corrupt the whole system over there was. And this is in Ukraine. This is the early 2000s. And so it's not like, oh, Ukraine is this bastion of freedom and just everybody's great over there. But at the same time, within this conflict between these two nations, Ukraine did nothing to Russia. And Russia simply invaded them for no reason, other than the fact that they talked to the U.S. about joining NATO, which is why would they want to join NATO? So they don't get invaded by Russia. You know?
Okay, that's helpful.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to take a quick time out here and hear from our friends at Impact 360. We'll see you right back here in 90 seconds.
It's time to prepare. Let's get ready for the journey ahead. Life doesn't give us a redo. We don't get to run it back. Along the way, we will face obstacles and challenges, but we are carrying light into the dark places. Our paths and our destinations are different, but our beginning is the same. We must prepare. This is why Impact 360 Institute exists. Get ready to grow, to stand firm, to be who God created you to be, to lead with courage, truth, and love. This experience will transform your life. Be challenged to grow your faith. Learn how to think, not what to think. Build community with those seeking to live like Jesus. Establish spiritual rhythms, discover how to be and make disciples. And put your faith into action. As you prepare for the journey ahead, deepen your understanding of what God has revealed about reality and why Christianity is true. Discover your identity in Christ and your God-given calling in authentic community. Cultivate a servant's heart and live a life of spirit-empowered kingdom influence.
Once again, I want to encourage you to go check out the work that our friends are doing at Impact 360. See if it might be a good fit for your family in helping to supplement your efforts of discipleship with your kids. They have summer camps, gap year program, and even a master's level program. All right, Kevin, let's, in this last segment, talk about China. If there's anything I understand less than Russia and Ukraine, it's China. And you have some interesting thoughts about their strategy. What are they up to? Why are they doing what they are doing? Talk to us big picture about what you think the Chinese strategy is.
Yeah, China's easy to understand, mainly because they put it out there what their goals are and what their plans are. But in broad terms, China views the world. They view history, right? They look at history long and they look at history way in the future. And they see that, hey, for this period of time in history, the United States and the Western powers have controlled the world. But they believe that period at some point will come to an end. And when it comes to an end, they are positioning themselves to be the ones that are at the top of the totem pole, as they have always wanted to be. China is a very unique place and a very unique culture in terms of when they finally came into contact with Europeans, China was the big dog on the block, right? They felt their ideology was the world, the actual literal world revolved around China, and their emperor was kind of like God on earth. I mean, that was the mindset they had. And so when they lost the war Europeans, their psyche was all messed up. They didn't know all this stuff in the world really existed. And so that type of mindset that China is to be great still exists. And it's almost like they have been punished or something because they aren't on top. They are low. They have to bow down to us to a degree. Well, they know one day in history, they played the long, slow game. History tells them that every empire ends. So the U.S. is going to fall off at some point. And what they're doing is positioning themselves to, when that happens, they are the hegemonic power in the world. And so at the end of the day, that's what they're doing. They're doing things economically for that, and militarily, they're preparing themselves for that. They're building aircraft carriers now, and they're doing all the things to be like the United States. They're giving foreign aid to countries to buy influence. They are buying their. Go ahead.
Yeah, because I was going to bring that up, because Monique being in Africa, and one of the things that she has pointed out many times, I don't think many of us in America are aware of, is how much China is coming into Africa and into Latin America. Yes. And so I think she told me it was in Zimbabwe, or it could be Zambia, but I think it's Zimbabwe, where, they come in and they promise people, we'll fix your roads, we'll fix your infrastructure, we'll invest in and so many of these countries have desperate people. Mm-hmm. Their governments are extremely corrupt. And so they don't have good systems and clean water and safe roads. And China's coming in and buying up a lot of resources and building that infrastructure and making friends with African countries, Latin American countries, buying up land and that sort of thing. Is that part of their strategy of positioning themselves around the world? Okay.
Absolutely. If you own land, you could put bases. They own a lot of different ports in Latin America and in Africa, because one of the things they did was they would offer them loans to build ports. And the countries were like, absolutely, we'll take it. China always knew those countries could never pay those loans. So what happens when they default on the loan? China then comes in and owns the port. So imagine you're a nation and your major port or ports are owned by a foreign country. And so, China is doing a lot of that stuff to posture themselves in a position of power throughout the world, economically and militarily. And that's what I try to warn people about, the isolationist mindset. They think that if the United States just all come home, everything just kind of goes to neutral and everybody kind of does their own thing. It's like, no, there's going to be a power vacuum, and someone is going to fill that vacuum, and it's going to be China, because China has positioned themselves to fill it from an economic and a military standpoint. And so it's one of those things of, you can have the United States as the hegemonic power in the world, or you can have communist China as the power in the world. You choose. But this isolationist mindset of, we just come home, we just worry about ourselves, we don't worry about what's going on in the rest of the world, that is not going to lead to the outcome people think it is.
So. And we're living really in a different kind of a day and age than we were before World War II, where countries we're just more global, we're more interconnected. It's not as isolated as it was prior to World War II. And I think that, we're just living in a different world, in a different situation, and involvement maybe has to be part of that. And it's tricky sometimes in how much is being too involved. I think going toward the Christian worldview and looking at governments and kings, one of the things that we know from the book of Daniel, chapter 4, verse 32, and Job 12:23, that God causes kingdoms and nations to rise and fall. So macro, big picture, nothing's going to get ahead of God and his sovereign plan. But it's also sobering when we think about the Chinese. They're kind of playing the waiting game with us to see, eventually America could fall as a country, and they're just kind of standing in the wings and trying to position themselves as a rival world power. So that's sobering for us, I think, as Americans, because we've had such a long history of being the dominant world power. We also know from the Bible that the end of the story is God wins.
Yep.
Read the book of Revelation. And that for the Christian, our job, if you will, is in the day-to-day is obedience. We obey no matter what kind of international chaos is happening. But I think peace is also an important conversation, because when there's peace, the gospel can go out with more ease. One of the things I've talked about on my channel before is the Roman roads during the first century facilitated the quick expansion and proclamation of the gospel. And it was a time of the Pax Romana. It was a relatively peaceful time. And so the idea of peace through strength, having stability around the world as much as possible. Obviously, we know humanity has fallen, and there's that piece of the puzzle too. But, there's a Christian case to be made for peace. Not peace at all costs, maybe not peace through appeasement, but I don't know. Those are some thoughts that are kind of coming to me in this conversation from a worldview standpoint. Do you have any other thoughts to share along those lines?
Yeah. It's one of those things too. Because the United States isn't perfect, it hasn't been perfect, right? We haven't always used that power in a good way. Sometimes we do things to our own benefit, whether that's good for someone else or not. We are going to. So, for example, we in the past we have supported some very, very bad, heavy-handed dictators and rulers throughout the world, and the reason we did that was because it was beneficial to us. They were kind, or not kind to us, but politically they were aligned with us, and so we allowed them to be very, very heavy-handed dictators. We didn't care what they did to their people, and so the way their people viewed it as if we were who was holding up and funding and empowering their rulers and oppression. And so I say that just to say that power that is, that I talk about, nation as a world power having, we haven't always done what we would say the Christian thing, the godly thing, the right thing to do. And so that causes all types of issues in the world. And no matter what human government that is, that's going to always be the case, right? It's just we have to, as Christians, like you said, speak up. We do the right things. We stand for the right things, and let that be it. Because, like, at the end of the day, it is really God who chooses rulers throughout this world, and we are to respect, rulers and authorities, and show honor to who honor is due. And even when that's hard, we have an election coming up. No matter which way it goes, whoever holds that office, we show honor to whoever honors due. And so, the world seems like if the world seems like it's on fire, cut off your TV, get off social media, read your Bible, spend time in the Word, spend time with your immediate surroundings, spend time with your family, and disconnect from the news, because that's what gives us this feeling that the world is in chaos, because it is. The world is broken. It's always broken. It always will be broken. It's just that we in the United States, by the grace of God, have enjoyed some times of peace that the rest of history could never even fathom. They could never fathom the money, wealth, peace that we have today. And it's sad, because even people in our own country rail against us as if they're oppressed and America's the worst place on earth, and they have no idea they live in the freest land of opportunity and wealth, and they are so spoiled, they don't even know it. And so it's just having that proper perspective, and being thankful that we do live in this nation, because other countries, from a military standpoint, we get to work with other nations. We get to see the hardships and the struggles they deal with. We're in Afghanistan. You're trying to really help these people. And at the end of the day, when we leave, the Taliban's coming back. And it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking. And so, yeah, just peace, pray, unplug, and know that Christ is on the throne. God is still sovereign. He's still sovereign. No matter what is going on in the world, God is sovereign.
That's a good place to kind of land us today. And I want to emphasize something you just said there of no matter what happens in the election, it's our job to act righteously as Christians.
Yes.
We don't need to lose our minds or think that the world is ending. As I've said on this show before, Christians can live without conservatism. I don't think conservatism can long endure without Christianity. But we have to learn and understand that Christians have lived under every type of government there is. We've lived under kings. We've lived under tyrants. We've lived under democracies and republics, and in anarchy and in peace. This is the enduring legacy of our faith. So do not lose heart if things don't go the way you hope. Yep. In this election, your call as a Christian is to live righteously no matter where God has positioned you.
Amen. Amen. And I'll just say this, as if America falls, that means that it has served its purpose. God has other plans. His plan of saving the world is not America.
It's a hard word, but it's a true word, and it's good. Well, thanks, Kevin, for doing this. It's been a great conversation. We look forward to your feedback. We hope you've been finding these conversations helpful as we're getting into the political season even more. We're just in the thick of it now. We're weeks away. And no matter what happens, just remember all the things we've been trying to anchor you to in your faith and in your worldview in Scripture. Don't put your hope in a person unless that person's name is Jesus Christ of Nazareth. He is the one and only true hope of the world. And people need hope right now. Give them real hope. Don't give them a human political hope. They need real eternal hope. So thank you for joining us. Please share this show with your pastor, a friend, or as Monique would say if she were here, share it with your enemy, and pray for one another. We will see you very soon. Don't forget, Monique will be back here next week with me live in studio for a recap on her mission trip. We'll see you then.
There's nothing left.